So anyway, hey guys.
How you doing? So now
Uh,
I think we're talking about
Yep. More comics.
Stormwatch specifically.
Starting with Stormwatch.
Hooray!
Yeah. Issue 3 and 4. This arc completed last week. Yeah.
Yeah, something along those lines.
So, you want to start?
What was the plot of Stormwatch? A bunch of guys were fighting a giant thing.
Yep, there's a giant thing.
And the moon was turning into a thing.
Yeah, the giant thing was in the moon, wasn't it?
No, I think those were different things.
Oh.
And then or they might not have been, but then they stopped the thing in the moon, and then they got some other guys to help them, but then the thing got bigger, and then
There are things and
they defeated the thing.
All the things were defeated.
That is how I feel when I'm reading Stormwatch.
Yes, Stormwatch, to put it lightly, very confusing. A lot going on, multiple fronts, multiple characters on multiple teams, doing multiple things to prevent multiple problems from happening to multiple places.
I would say the problem that I have with Stormwatch isn't necessarily that it's confusing in the sense that it has too many plot elements. I just think that its presentation is very cluttered.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that I gave an example of Legion of Superheroes had like probably the most confusing and jumbled first issue of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Stormwatch is necessarily like that, but I think that both visually and in terms of plot, it tends to not really give you something that you can grab onto and follow.
Yeah.
In terms of that, things that happen don't flow very smoothly from one to another. So, and also there are other things that are thrown in that aren't necessarily as relevant. So when you're dealing with a large team of people who you're being introduced to, which can always be really difficult to set up and establish at the beginning, especially some of whom are demonstrated to already know each other, some of whom are shown to be meeting for the first time. So you have all of these relationships between people that are kind of ambiguous. Once you start throwing in a plot that doesn't necessarily have that groundedness, doesn't necessarily have that flow, it can be kind of difficult to follow. That being said, I don't think that by the end it's terrible. I just think that this kind of confusion is something that has persisted from the beginning of this first conflict to the end of it.
Yeah, it's confusing. I mean, I like all the characters who I understand I'm meeting. I like. I said this when we reviewed the first couple of issues. I like how they have really weird powers. Like, it's not just flight or anything. It's like power over the media, power. They talk to cities.
The god of cities.
The god of cities, and which is a really weird god. Anyway,
what I love. See, here's the thing. This is going to be a bit getting off on a tangent. But what I love is the idea of gods are things that humans create to
explain natural phenomena.
To embody natural phenomena, and or if not natural phenomena, abstract concepts. That there'll be personifications of things like chaos or nature. Well, nature, I guess, is also part of natural phenomenon. But cities are something that are not only man-made, but they're largely modern constructs. That, I mean, cities have been around for a while, but most humans historically have not lived in cities. Interestingly enough, recently we got to the majority of the population on Earth for the first time in human history living in cities as opposed to other areas.
Congratulations,
so, hooray
humans.
for mankind. But it's just such a seemingly inappropriate or unconventional thing to have god of that I find that very amusing.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you got Martian Manhunter.
Actually,
who for some reason
to go off on
wait. Who for some reason on the cover of this is shooting laser beams out of his eyes.
Yep.
Someone screwed up there. Keep talking.
But yeah, another thing about the God of Cities thing. There's a short anime special thing called Karas or Karas. It's crow in Japanese. And they also have gods of cities, and they fight with each other. Anyway.
Oh, so is that like every city has a god?
City has a
like
guardian.
A patron.
Well, every city has like a god, and then they have a warrior to fight. And it's weird. Anyway.
Interesting.
Anime.
But as I was saying, I think that in terms of characters and character delineation, that was something that was very confusing at first. I think that now it's actually pretty firmly
Well, by the end of issue 4, everyone's together.
Everyone's together. Everyone knows who each other
everyone knows who each other are.
But I think it's also very easy for us to follow who they are. For most of these characters, you don't have
an introduction.
No, you do have an introduction.
Well, it's not
in the first issue. I don't. What I was going to say is, for most of these characters, you don't have a story that really involves them on a character type level the way that things like Supergirl or Batgirl do. But
a few of them do.
A few of them do, but I'm saying that
Um,
none of them really are central to that story, except
yeah.
for maybe their leader. But
And also Apollo gets his own arc of
his
him
own
being
arc.
invited to join Stormwatch and then eventually
Yeah, I
joining.
mean that's an
And
element. I'm
we have
just
what's the guy in the black knight? Right,
Midnighter.
or Midnighter. He gets a little thing. So certain characters get their own kind of private time.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that we never have a scene to itself where Apollo sits down and debates the values
No,
of joining Stormwatch. It's not that kind of a story.
no.
That they're more
It is
bits
very
and
in excuse me. In contrast to Batgirl and Supergirl, it's very plot driven.
yeah, and at the same time, I think the fact that the plot is kind of scattered is makes that kind of difficult. But at the same time, for something that's so plot driven, I think the characters we've pretty much gotten to a point where it's not that hard to follow them, and we can differentiate between everyone. We know who people are. We don't necessarily know a lot about them,
Yeah,
but we know enough about them for
to
these stories
follow
to
them.
make sense.
Uh
Yeah.
huh.
So, is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Well, just over the course of the 4 issues of the first arc, it started off very confusing, pretty much not knowing who anyone was, and as the story kind of continued, you're being introduced to less and less characters over the course of each issue. But things just split because at first there was one threat, then there were two threats, and just the way that all the characters interact, they kind of interact via like comms and telecommunications and um, I just think it was really messy,
Yeah.
and we said that, and but after the start, I'm liking what I can understand, but because it is so hard to follow right now, I don't know if I will continue picking it up.
I think the problem that this had starting off is that we started in the middle of everything.
Yeah.
There was a problem that was already. I'm going to compare this, I think, perhaps because they are released on the same week, perhaps because they're both
Team
team
issues.
comics. I'm going to compare that a little bit.
Let me guess. Justice League International.
Of course.
Yeah.
That the reason Justice League International is so easy to follow and so user friendly is that it pretty much begins with this team being formed. Or something like Blackhawks. In the first issue, we have someone who's being shown around and introduced to the team.
Yeah.
But with regard, while other things are happening, so that's a bit more complicated. But with regards to Stormwatch, we never really have that kind of
Well, I guess
formal
the closest
introduction.
thing would be Apollo, because he's being asked to join.
That's true, but
also something like with Blackhawks or Justice League, there's only one threat, and the team is all together all the time, pretty much.
that too. Also,
Or in the case of International, we're introduced to the team as a whole first, and they split up into smaller groups to take on what are branches of the same threat.
the interesting
But
thing
with
is that
Stormwatch, we're introduced to like two teams. They're the same team, but there are two larger groups fighting two larger things, all while dealing with one kind of central communication. And the way that the comics travel through those lines is just it's not done as well as it could be.
yeah, this is very split up kind of.
Yeah.
Also, I think that on that note, Justice League, the main Justice League, is kind of going to the other extreme and introducing its characters very slowly. And I cannot wait until we get to do our own little video on that. But
on the first arc of Justice League, that'd be good. I think it's gonna be a long one though, because just at the end of not gonna say anything. Anyway.
But we are not there yet. But at the same time, I think beyond, I'm just going to make a very slight comment.
Have you read Justice League 4 yet?
I'm just going to make a very slight comment. It's good. But if there's anything else that I have to say about Stormwatch, I think that also a lot of things aren't necessarily... It's even acknowledged at the end of issue 4 that even though this, like, crisis-averted situation, there are a lot of things that aren't actually answered, but there are a lot of things that we still don't actually know. And so these may come into play down the line. This may be a smaller element of a much larger story, or it might be moving on. So, but as far as crisis aversion goes, as far as dealing with this main threat goes, it's been pretty scattered. Then again, as I say with every issue of Stormwatch, because they seem to be getting increasingly a bit more focused. That I
but at the end of this arc, my thing is with this that the first arc really kind of turned me off because it was so disorganized. But just by issue 5, I think, because we have at last everyone all together and we have this one kind of thing happening. Like it seems like it'd be much more appealing to read, but I can't.
You don't know. I'm in kind of a similar position that I've gotten through issue 4 and I still don't know if I want to keep reading this or
Uh-huh.
not. It's kind of what I say, though, about the pilot of a TV show, but the pilot episode is usually the worst episode of the series. Even if you look at... I'm trying to think of shows that have multiple part pilots. I think the very first episode of Justice League, the TV show, cartoon, that is probably one of my least favorite episodes and doesn't really work very well, but you need it. And I think Stormwatch, this might be the kind of thing we're dealing with. So, I mean, I'm still kind of on the fence with it. I think that without reading this, one would probably be very lost.
Coming into issue 5.
Coming into issue 5, I assume. Issue 5 isn't out yet, naturally, but at the same time, I'm not going to say that this is the most rewarding thing to read.
It seems like an uphill battle right now.
Yeah, so let's see where we go with that. Now, let's move on to something else that is... This is a very just oddly structured comic that we're about to get to.
But it's very good.
I love this cover, by the way.
Yeah. All-Star Western. We have 3 and 4 with us.
Yes.
With 3 being the really cool cover.
I mean, I think that it's a bit unconventional to use a white background. And just
actually, a lot of comics this week have used a white background. I know Flash, Justice League Dark.
I know Batman 3 used a white background, but to have just a single image...
Very artsy.
Artsy, I don't know, it's very...
I like it. It's just
It's kind of cheesy with the 2 guns, but I think it works.
It's cool looking.
Anyway.
So with All-Star Western, we also have a weird structure within the arcs.
See, the thing about All-Star Western is that first off, it kind of has the...
Well, it's a twofer for one.
First off, they have the elements of an anthology comic. That there will be multiple series... Well, there will be multiple stories, multiple separate things. What's the word I'm looking for? Essentially...
There'll be 2 stories.
Separate series going on in the same series that take place in completely different times and places and have involved different characters. Kind of similar to the way Men of War did.
A pulp. Like a pulp book. Like a pulp magazine.
Well, as I said, like an anthology serial. But as far as All-Star Western goes, now we've been mainly focusing on Jonah Hex and his unlikely comrade...
Amadeus Arkham. Not Amadeus Arkham. Is it Amadeus Arkham? It's one of the Arkhams. What the fuck is his name? It's Amadeus, isn't it? I'm just making myself... It is Amadeus Arkham. I'm a fucking idiot.
The other Arkham that I confuse him with sometimes is Jeremiah Arkham, because I think that's the only other Arkham that we actually know. But yes, it is Amadeus Arkham in the he actually mentions in one book. I'm thinking of using some... I need some... I'm thinking of opening Mental Asylum.
Yeah, so it's pre...
Why could I not say that?
It's pre-Arkham Asylum.
It's pre-Asylum. It's pre-Insanity for him. Yeah. It's sad that we know what happens to him, that he goes kind of...
Loopity-loop.
But at this point, he's just kind of a nerdy psychologist at a time when psychiatry and psychology weren't even real things. So it's kind of the misadventures of these two trying to find out who Jack the Ripper is.
It's actually, I guess, kind of the way the narrative is written. I want to say, and also because I just have this on the mind, Sherlock Holmes, and that you have kind of the Watson, the doctor, writing all the notes down about what the detective is doing.
Definitely. It's odd because it's a Jonah Hex focused series. All-Star Western always has been. But with this, we do have really Jonah Hex as viewed through the eyes of Arkham. It's a strange thing to do that you take this really sort of classic Western type character and you define him and you establish him and you set him up by taking him out of his element. Not that he's uncomfortable out of his element, not that he's a fish out of water, but everyone is kind of uncomfortable with him. Although I think that might be something he just gets wherever he goes. So as far as this storyline goes, it's odd because the series is broken up into chapters. Yeah. And the main conflict that we've been following in this series up until issue 3 kind of pretty much resolves itself.
In the middle of issue 3.
Yeah, it doesn't...
And where it gets really weird, though, it ends in the middle of issue 3, and I mean the middle of issue 3 during the Hex part. But then we go to issue 4, and in the beginning of issue 4, we start in medias res on a different story. So it starts off the new arc in medias res.
In media res.
In media res. After this one ends, in the middle of this one, we kind of start a new one. We have a new thing happening. Very weird. But it is very pulpy, I guess. Like it makes sense for this kind of series.
It's strange because issue 4 seems to be establishing very clearly that we're looking at a new adventure, which is odd because the way issue 3 was, it could have left off there. It
ends on a new adventure.
But also the way issue 3 there is with everything that's leading up to it, it could end there or it could keep going. That there are still a few things that are unsettled. The odd thing that surprised me is that in issue 4, it's still Jonah Hex in classic Gotham with Jeremiah Arkham fighting crime, which I assumed, or at least...
Oh, actually, what's weird about... I think what's really weird about issue 4 is that they're reintroduced to each other, because it seems that after issue 3, they kind of fell out of communication. They part ways. Then in issue 4, because it's told in media res, we see them meet up again after they've been apart for a while. It's very weird.
It's very unusual.
Yeah. But unlike something where Stormwatch can get confusing because we're only following 2 characters and they're each doing one plot line, it's very easy to follow. Like like you won't get too confused.
I mean,
it's a bit jarring to go from issue 3 to issue 4, but you get used to it easily, and I think it's better written.
Moving on from structure, I think in terms of actual story, this is a very fun story.
It's very fun, very cowboys and not cowboys.
Yes, very. It's essentially sort of the mixing, I think, of that steampunk element with that Western element, which is something that you don't see very often, even though they're occupying the same time period. I think steampunk tends to have more of a European, British influence, but overall, it's the story of Jonah Hex, this guy who's
a bounty hunter.
He's a bounty hunter, but of course, he really doesn't belong in society, but he's there anyway, and so he's just going to get his job done and kill a bunch of people. But
and he's the best at it.
But not in a crass way like Deathstroke. I mean, he's still...
Well, I think it isn't as crass because with Deathstroke, we're following it from Deathstroke's perspective. And Deathstroke is kind of a rude guy. But with All-Star Western, we're seeing it through the eyes of Arkham. And he's a bit of a more classy fellow.
And also, the thing is that Jonah Hex is he's very much a classic type of Western anti-hero. He's a man of few words. He's a
John Wayne character.
He does have within him sort of a shred of humanity. I think he's much less a John Wayne character, much more a Clint Eastwood character.
Yeah. Man with No Name. Is Man with No Name Clint Eastwood?
I don't know. I know a lot of others. I would say The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is sort of my idea of the
What about Chinatown?
Chinatown?
I mean, Big Trouble in Little Chinatown. Whatever that is.
I know there's Big Trouble in Little Italy, and I know Chinatown. I don't think that those...
Oh.
I think Chinatown's a detective movie.
Whatever.
And Big Trouble in Little Italy would definitely be not a cowboy movie.
I don't know what I'm
Are you thinking of Dirty Harry?
I might be thinking of Dirty Harry.
Anyway, talking about comics again. So, in the same way that Clint Eastwood can be likable, but he is a man of very ambiguous values, but at the same time, a man with a personality that's kind of... You wouldn't want to know the guy, but to read about him from a distance can be very entertaining. Also, when he's contrasted with a kind of nerdy, fun character like Dr. Arkham. It's strange because I enjoy the arc. It's not really a very complex story. It kind of... I think early on it kind of set up sort of things that it didn't really follow through with.
It set up something really grand, like this cabinet of shadowy figures controlling everything, and then it kind of peters out into just Jonah Hex killing a bunch of people.
Yeah. So
but by the end,
without giving away the actual details of how this happens, I think saying Jonah Hex kills people or Jonah Hex gets the guy is kind of a foregone conclusion.
But also by the end, we're not completely sure if everything's resolved, which makes issues 4 starting a new adventure kind of weird.
Yeah, so it raises some questions. It's, I think, kind of a one-note story. It doesn't really have a lot of twists or turns. What you start out with in the first few issues is pretty much what you get by the end.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it's very enjoyable. So if you read issue 1 or 2 and you like it, then it's definitely something that's worth seeing through.
I think it compares favorably to something like Deathstroke. And they're kind of both on the same note of just one person killing a bunch of people.
Well, I think no, I would disagree with that.
Well, yeah.
I think All-Star Western, Jonah Hex is coming in and he gets involved with stopping some criminal or whatever.
Yeah.
Deathstroke is about an assassin who just...
Well, it's assassin versus bounty hunter.
I think there's a significant difference there.
Yeah. But...
maybe I'm just particular.
It's a good comic.
It's a
good comic. I'm going to continue to read it.
And let's talk about since we have a bit of
We have
time,
a few minutes left.
let's talk about, within All-Star Western, I think that, and then we could end
Okay.
this video. I think we should mention El Diablo.
Ah,
who
yes, El
has
Diablo.
also had his arc resolved.
Yeah, his
in
2-issue arc.
His 2-issue arc.
Mm-hmm.
He is.
Yes, El
Would you
Diablo.
like to say? This is.
I kind of forgot.
It's only 2 parts, but yeah, it's before that.
Yeah.
It's only in 2 parts, so it's a very short story, but it has a very, and I love the artwork on this. I'm sorry, I know we're really not here to talk about artwork, more just story structure, but it has such a kind of Tales from the Crypt look to it. It's just really kind of a very classic feel. It's very simple, very straightforward. I think it's more of a, I would call it almost an exposition. Not in the terms of story exposition, but kind of like an exposition match for the comic. That's probably strange terminology to use. But I don't think it's anything too amazing. I don't think it's anything that really...
it's cute.
It's cute.
It's a cute story.
I think that's a good word to describe it. I wouldn't buy the comic for it, but unlike, let's say... Well, without giving comparison, I also don't feel it really takes away from the comic. I'm not upset that I don't get enough Jonah Hex.
It's a little bit extra. It's a garnish. It's a condiment to the rest of the comic.
Yes.
Where you wouldn't eat just ketchup. We know someone who would, but normal people wouldn't just eat ketchup, but they like it on their chicken.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's what it is. It's ketchup.
Or perhaps, since it comes after the story, it's a bit like dessert.
Yeah. That's a better one.
Yeah. And dessert, and the food you eat for dessert, perhaps generally isn't very good food, but it's something that you kind of enjoy.
Yeah.
It's not, this is just a random
But then some
thought.
people really prefer the dessert over the main course.
Yes, I know people like this.
Yeah.
His name is Kevin. But overall, I would say it's not the main attraction. It's not something that would draw me to the book, but hey, why not?
It's fun to have. It's a nice extra.
It's interesting because I think that this is not a critical element. This is just my own brainstorming. I think that if I were to set up a book like this, what I would probably do is I would have a strong main story, and at the end, I would probably put in the smaller, something a bit more either over the top and silly, like kind of some sort of crazy violent thing, kind of like a Deathstroke type thing. I think if Deathstroke were just a few pages at the end of each comic, that would kind of be much more enjoyable, or something that's a bit more, I don't know, out there. But even so, I think that perhaps since we've run up the clock on this, and since
we will save our last completed arc for the next video.
Yes, we will save the last for last.
Yep. And we have a lot to talk about, but we won't tell you what it is until you figured it out already. Anyway.
We'll see you then.